Hey guys, it's Ethan from Zimmer Labs, and these are Henry's Solos Hold Ahsoka snips. I just finished these up. These are budget builds that I finished for Henry. He reached out and asked if I could do something competitive price-wise with Corbanth. So I did the best I could to match Corbanth's price, which is definitely a challenge because my stuff isn't mass-produced overseas, but I wanted to do that for Henry since he was a first-time customer, and I would rather, you know, not make much money, but get a new customer and, you know, send some really nicely built sabers out into the world than have Henry end up getting something he regrets. So hopefully these work out for Henry, and let's run through them. Like I said, these are Solos Holds. The first thing to point out is the finish on these guys. When you buy Ahsokas from Solos Hold, they don't have this finish. It's hard to actually predict what finish you're going to get with those because they often come different. So, for example, the first set that I got were completely matte and unfinished looking. They almost looked like they had been like, oh, what's the word I'm looking for? You know, transformer parts. The metal parts. Oh, I'm totally blanking on the word, but anyways, super unfinished looking and matte. The second set that I got looked more like this with a much more finished look, kind of a brushed aluminum look. The third set I got was kind of in between the two, and then this set was more towards the second set with a more brushed aluminum look and almost a finished look. Probably the fourth was definitely the best of all of them. So all I had to do for these, Henry asked me to polish them for him, so all I had to do was some mild light polishing on these. So what I did was about half an hour on each using some really light compounds. I used some blue and some white compounds and turned the speed down a little bit and turned the pressure I applied down a bit to get this look. Basically it looks like a slightly weathered, just you know, basically like they're used, you know, for a few years by, you know, a Jedi or something like that, but not beat up. So they have a little bit of a shine to them, but still kind of retain the horizontally brushed aluminum look. The next thing I did as far as finish goes on these guys was to do a little bit of acid wash strategically. So this clamp card, it's a faux clamp card right here. This part, when you get it from Solos Hold, doesn't have any contrast or dark color to it. It's just a rectangle with some high points and low points. So if you sand it down and then acid wash it, you get these black stripes right down in between each stripe, which makes it pop and makes it look nice. Makes it stand out as a clamp card. And then I did the same thing, mild sanding and acid wash on the pommel to give these pommel cubes a bit of grunge in between so that they also pop, stand out a bit more. And then just a quick polish on the two little brass greebles here. They look like buttons, but they're not really functional, they're just decorative. The last thing, actually before we get there, I did the same on this guy to polish up this brass and then to do an acid wash on the pommel here to give it some grunge. The last thing I did is something that I think is kind of important for these guys, is I replaced the buttons, and what I use is just some rivet heads, because they are the exact same size and shape, but they're longer. And the main complaint that I have with the Solos Hold Ahsoka snips is that the buttons are a little too short. So they're kind of hard to press because, you know, they really don't, they're almost flush with the side of the hilt So when you try to press them, a lot of times you have to, you know, kind of look around to find them. So you want them to just stick out a little bit more. And hopefully, as you guys can see, the buttons stick out about 2 millimeters probably or so off the sides, and they're really easy to find now. And as you can hear, they have nice action on them. So they're easy to find and they have good action. So that's really all you shoot for with the switch. You don't want them to stand out and be, you know, obviously visible, but you want them to be easy to find, easy to use, and to work correctly. And again, same situation over here, just kind of extending them out. Now for both of these guys, to activate them, you simply remove the pommel, and there is a flat, super flush kill key on the end here. Pop it out, and that's where your recharge port is hanging out. You don't have to take these off though, because they are a twist to activate. So in that position, you've got power, and then just twist it to turn it off. And then all you have to do is just screw your pommel back on. And ditto for this guy. Now let's go ahead and throw the blades in. Now the next thing that I had to do a little work on was the width of the emitters on both sabers. They're really a tight fit, and it was literally impossible to get the blade to slide in when I first started working on these. So I had to sand out the inside of the emitters and sand the bottom probably inch of both blades to make them fit. But you know, that's not really it's not a challenge, it's not hard to do. It's just something that's probably worth mentioning for any of you guys who are building these yourself. It's entirely possible that you'll find that when you go to put your blade in, it won't go in. And you know, it's gonna drive you nuts. But if you take a little bit of time with a Dremel and some abrasive buffs and just work the inside of the emitter out all the way around, spend, you know, 5 or 10 minutes doing each one, that will loosen it up enough that the blade will slide in and out nicely. Before we get to the blades, let's quickly show you guys the chassis. Now, I had some old, I don't know exactly what they're called, but I think these are like archived Padawan chassis. They are Goth 3 Designs Padawan chassis that I had purchased for another customer's builds, oh, 2 or 3 or 4 even years ago at this point now, which I had never used because we had put off the builds in order to do some different saber builds for that customer. And so since I had these chassis kicking around, and since we were trying to do a budget build and keep the price as low as possible, I was able to just use these parts because at that point they were almost surplus. So it ended up working out that Henry gets a couple of really high-end chassis, no crystal chambers, no metal parts, but nonetheless very nicely designed, 3D printed, high-end Goth 3 Designs chassis for the price of, you know, whatever Corbanth gives you, which are really just, no, I'm not trying to knock Corbanth, but you know, the quality of the plastic that you guys get if you buy a pre-installed Corbanth saber, and the chassis is just garbage. It's you know, you give it a hard flick and you're probably going to crack the plastic. But these guys are much better, much higher quality stuff, you know, flexible, not going to break on you. And, you know, they actually have a decent looking design to them. This is the little Shoto chassis with Proffieboard 18650. Oh no, I'm lying actually. That is a 18500 battery, 2000 milliamp hour, 15 amp, pogo pin style TCSS blade connector recessed into this connector holder, and then your switches are mounted right up on the top here, right up in the basically in the blade connector, and those switches line up with the plungers that I was just showing you guys. And then oddly enough, the speaker for this guy is hiding right underneath the blade connector right here, so the speaker is not on this end. You've got your recharge port, SD card, USB, battery, Proffieboard right here in the middle, and then on this end, a 20mm speaker and your blade connector. And the other thing to show you guys, to point out, is the access for the SD and USB. In order to reconfigure or reprogram this guy, the USB is right here and the SD card is right beneath it, and I did slightly modify the chassis just by cutting this section out here so that there would be an avenue to connect the USB cable to it. Otherwise, this section right here would have basically blocked that off, and it would have been impossible to reprogram, which obviously is just not ideal. On the Daito, on the larger saber, same goes for the Proffieboard here. If you look in, you can see the USB port is hanging out right there, so you can just kind of go in with an L-shaped USB, and then if you flip it over, SD card is hanging out right there, so you could slide it up and it will come out this window. Or you can just use the USB and access the SD card through USB on that side. Now let's reinstall the chassis, which is a simple matter of just lining up the buttons with the plungers and then just pressing it in until it fits. The Shoto is a little bit tighter than the Daito, which is basically a perfect fit. It's just barely enough pressure to call it pressure, but as you can see, doesn't require any pushing or wiggling to get it to fit in there. Let's turn this guy back on. I'll put the pommel back on. Another thing to mention is, for these guys, it's very important to use just a tiny little bit of lubrication on the threads, because these are the type of really sharp, kind of jagged aluminum threads that are very easy to cross thread and very easy to completely destroy. And once you get this cross threaded, which is especially easy if you have something like a chassis that's going to go into the middle of this and kind of aim it. So if that chassis is slightly out of center in any direction, when you go to screw it in, you're going to be screwing it in slightly off center, and you're going to instantly cross thread those threads. So what I like to do is I put a little tiny bit of white lithium grease, maybe you guys can see that, but just a tiny bit on the threads, which, as you can see, makes the threads nice and smooth and easy, and you don't have to worry about cross threading it anywhere near as much, because if you start cross threading it and you catch yourself, you're going to be able to unscrew it without damage if there's a little bit of lubrication in there to help. If there isn't, the aluminum is going to catch and cut and bind, and you're going to those threads are going to be jacked basically first dry. So that's something that's important for those of you guys who are doing a build with the Ahsoka snips yourself. Same here, as you can see, there's just a tiny little bit of white lithium grease on there. And as you can see, this guy is a perfect example. It's not quite straight, so if I were to screw this in right now, it might cross thread, and if I didn't have any lithium grease on there, it would be bad news. So the trick is, if that's the case and you're screwing it in and it's not quite straight, just take your time, do it slowly. Don't apply a lot of pressure. Just kind of go slow and whittle a little bit until you feel that the threads are completely accurately lined up and engaged, and then you don't have to worry about it. It's working great. You don't have to distress or stress out about cross-threading it and ruining the hilt. So both of these guys have the same blade setup. The opening blade on both is a bright white audio flicker blade. The second blade is a white and ultra high Kelvin cool. I guess it's either an audio flicker blade or a strobe to get kind of a silver effect. Tough to get a white colored lightsaber blade with neopixels and have it look good. This is very similar, but it's got a touch more blue in it and a touch less flicker going on. Next up, this is, again, similar, but a little bit more on the silver side. This is my standard electricity blade. So white turbine blade. Oh, actually. There we go. So it goes yellow to silver white with basically a really fast color cycle. And we've got a bluish white, silverish fire blade. And then the rest of the lineup of blades got purple here. This is a cool blue, yellow-white audio flicker blade with blue clashes. We've got standard Vader red. Crossguard Fireblade. And then a dual POV blade. And then I think we're back to the beginning. Yep, back to the beginning again. So aside from that first blade having a bit too slow retraction, everything looks pretty good to me. Henry, let me know what you think, and if you're happy with these, they are ready to go. Get them shipped out in the mail tomorrow, provided I hear back from you and you're happy. Thank you guys as always for watching. I've got a number of other saber videos that will be coming at you very quickly in the next, hopefully, few days to a week, because I am entirely behind on finishing. Alright, thanks guys.